It's that time again to react to your CDL hot takes. We're gonna go through probably 10 to 15 in this video. And if you wanna see me do another video like this in the future, if we get this video to 125 likes, I'll do another one. Let's get started. If I don't go through yours, I'm sorry. I can't cover all 50 in one video unless you want it to be an hour long. First one here comes from my guy, Rafi. Shout out Rafi, shout out OMIT. He said, Lunars, Neptune, Fellow, and Craze, which is the original OMIT Brooklyn roster from the start of BO6, would be top 6 in the league right now. And honestly, I think I agree, bro. I think I agree. We've actually talked about this a bit on the watch party. I think they would for sure be T8, probably even T6. You think about Neptune came on to Surge and instantly made them a top 3 team. Lunars, I think with Fellow would have just been a much better duo than bringing on Lunars to the current really crappy situation that's, you know, LAG. And then Craze has been really good and Fellow's been really good in Challengers. So I actually agree with my guy Rafi here. No OMIT Brooklyn bias out of me, but I genuinely think they could be T6, at the worst T8. Next one here comes from my guy Slayer. He said home crowd doesn't affect anything playing wise. And obviously this one is a controversial take in the scene because I think this is pretty 50-50 with how people feel. And I disagree. I think home crowd does in fact affect playing wise. And here is my reasoning why, right? If you look at sports, teams play better at home, right? Like historically in the NBA, teams' records at home are better than their records at away. They just win more games at home. I think it's like factually proven, basically, if you just look at the stats across sports, that teams with the home crowd just tend to play better right now. Obviously in COD, it's not the same as sports. And also in COD, you got to remember the home crowd, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, is pretty much going to be an OpTic home crowd. And obviously OpTic doesn't win every event. So does it make that much of a difference? Maybe not, right? But I think it actually does make a difference. It's just the adrenaline and the confidence I think it instills in you to play better. And also, it's like maybe not added pressure, but added motivation to play well in front of your home crowd. So I actually do think it affects the players. Obviously, it doesn't make Shotzzy magically go from a 1.2 to a 2.0 KD type of player. But I do think that extra motivation, the extra adrenaline and energy does actually make a difference in the play of the matches when you have the home crowd behind you. This take here was one of the hottest ones on the video. I mean, as you can see, it has 12 likes and it has 7 replies. And I mean, for the one take that have 7 replies under my tweet that has 50 replies is actually a pretty crazy thing to think about. My guy Braden here says, OpTic not keeping Ghosty is a bigger loss than OpTic losing Pred. Obviously, like I said, you can see the date and the timestamp on screen. This is from February 5th. So this was obviously before OpTic hit this major slump that they're in right now, where of course, they haven't won a map outside of Vegas Falcons. And looking at the replies on this tweet, they just won Worlds, losing a non-winning pro or a world champ. I think the answer is clear. No LOL, this is bad. This would be more understandable if OpTic hadn't won champs this year or last year. Looking back on it, not saying he's right, but I'm saying it doesn't look as crazy because obviously after bringing Pred back, OpTic has been in a historically bad slump, especially for any team, but especially for a team of the caliber that you and the expectations we hold OpTic Texas to. Now, obviously it's impossible to say if they had Ghosty on the team, would they be great? Would they not be bad? You can't actually use an argument of saying like, if they kept Ghosty, they'd be better, right? Because there's just no way of knowing that. But I do think this hot take is pretty interesting. You know, looking at how OpTic's been playing, I'm sure, and I've actually seen OpTic fans saying this, there's many that probably do wish Ghosty was on the roster right now. Next up, we got one here from my guy, MK. He says, roles are meaningless and purposely handicap your team's ceiling if you naturally play that way. If there's no flex gun or flex weapons outside of 2 to 3 hills in the game, you're just an AR. Stop calling it a flex. Won't work. He's a main. To me, now means he's too old to adapt. And this is a take I agree with and disagree with at the same time. So number one, especially in BO6, roles are definitely a lot more meaningless than they were in previous years. Depends on the play style of the game. It depends on the maps. It depends on the speed at which the gameplay is taken. I think we've seen that players that play a bit slower, like Insight or like Skies or other players have been struggling a bit more in BO6. And the teams that have faster ARs like Ghosty and Scrap, like Cellium and Drazah, now the Cellium has picked up the pace. Like the teams that have that dynamic are definitely playing better. So in that case, I agree. The roles are a lot more fluid this year and a bit more meaningless. But also, the part I disagree with is his second statement where he says, if there's no flex outside of a couple hills in the game, you're just an AR. Stop calling it a flex. To me, if an AR player is pulling out an SMG on a couple different hills or a couple different maps, I mean, that's the definition of a flex, right? Like, you're not flexing if you're not changing weapons, but if you are changing weapons, that's a flex. Now, obviously, it also goes both ways, right? Like, if there's an SMG pulling out a third AR, that they are both flexes, right? There could be two flexes on a team, but I think that is basically, by definition, a flex. This hot take, I think, is a hot take, right? LAG will win a major in 2025. They've had a rough start to the season, but they're underrated and they have a high ceiling of talent. Like I said, this is over a month ago, so now we've seen that they've made some roster changes, things like that. To me, at this point, it doesn't look like anyone's going to win outside of maybe FaZe and LAT. There is, I guess, a possibility of a team stealing one, but LAG is just not in that conversation, in my opinion, to be a team to steal an event. Now, if they make some changes, right, if they get Hook or they bring in Fellow or they bring in Cobra, they bring in Afro, maybe the team dynamic shifts up and we saw how good, Surge have gotten with Neptune. Maybe there's a chance they could end up being one of the top teams at some point, but given it right now, I'm definitely going to say this one's pretty hot. Every time there's a hot take about single elimination tournaments, you know it's going to be a good conversation. So Sunday here said, single elimination isn't bad. I think it's fine people go out after their loss. COD is day to day. I mean, you can kind of read what it says, but essentially he's saying single elim is fine. The best teams are going to separate themselves and they're going to win more often than not. And there's two sides of the coin, right? I actually agree that single elim is like more entertaining because you know, if a top team loses once, they're out, and that Cinderella run from a bottom team or a mid-pack team is more interesting because it feels more feasible in single elim. But also, to me, you need double elim, right? If you just look across sports in general, right? I know people don't like the sports comparison to esports because they're very different. But if you look across sports, which has been around for hundreds of years, right? So they got a lot of sample size to see what works and what doesn't. They pretty much all have double elim to an extent, right? And it's not as obvious as you might think, right? Obviously, the NFL, the playoffs is one and done. You can go to the Super Bowl, right? One and done. You just got to win one game. If you look at soccer, like you look at like the big cups, you look at Champions League, typically at least later on after you get out of group stage, there's two legs, right? You play one at home and one away, and the aggregate goal difference is who ends up moving on. If you look at basketball or hockey, they play like best of 7 series, right? So like you actually have to win 4 games. It's not just whoever wins the first game. I think that in its own way is like its own form of, obviously maybe it's not double elim, but its own form of like, yeah, you can lose a couple times, but you still have a chance to bounce back. And I think that's important for competition because the best teams should be winning in competition. Now, that's not always the most entertaining, right? Because watching a team like LAG at Major 2 and Vanguard make a run was super entertaining, but there's a reason FaZe and, New York and Ultra and OpTic and Thieves tend to win most of the events. It's because they're the best, right? And that's how it works out. And I think that's how it should be to have competitive integrity. Like I said, it's maybe not as entertaining, but for the sake of the competition, right? Imagine being a player and knowing that your team is the best, but the chances of you winning an event are much lower because it's every single event is single elim. Kind of takes away, I think, the motivation, even for people that want to be competitors to want to do that because you don't feel like you have the integrity in the competition. So for me, I like double elim, but I think single elim can have its place. There was a couple of takes about FaZe not winning any events after Major 1 for the rest of the year. I just pulled up this one from Dilly, but there was a bunch of people that said this. To me, it's definitely a hot take, right? I mean, right now, FaZe and Thieves are clearly like the two best teams that feel like they can win. Maybe Surge can. We've seen them beat FaZe twice online, but that's online. We'd see what they look like on LAN at Major 2. But I think right now, if you're saying, and like, again, this is from over a month ago, so this might have been when people thought OpTic were going to, we're still playing well. If we're saying FaZe can't win, that means LAT are just going to probably win everything. And as much as I love that as a Thieves fan, don't get me wrong, I'd sell my soul to see them win every event the rest of this season. It's just not likely, right, for them to win every single event. There's a reason we haven't seen teams really do that. So definitely, I think FaZe is probably going to get another one. Drazah will go down as a top 10 player before it's all said and done. Nate here with another hot take. And this one is obviously possible. I mean, projecting how a player is going to do and what they're going to end up by the end of their career is impossible. But when you think about what Drazah has already accomplished, right? He's already got, what, 5 or 6 wins. One of those is a ring. He's been in the league for 5 years now. I think he's, 23 years old. And obviously, if let's say he plays another 5 years, right? I'd say 28 is a fair, place to say someone might retire. If he plays another 5 years, he could get another ring in that time for sure. I mean, maybe even more, right? It depends how good FaZe continue to be and how long they stick together. But top 10 all time is definitely in the cards for him as he continues to progress. Pred is overrated and OpTic fans just be glazing. This one here from Zent is obviously a hot take. I mean, you already see the reply right under it. Pred's 96 overall card. It's funny, right, looking back at this because of how Pred and OpTic have been playing. I mean, I disagree. First and foremost, Pred is a great player. Before he was on OpTic, he was an MVP player, leading the Surge to literally winning an event, right? Major 3, which is just not expected for a Surge team like that in Vanguard, especially him being a rookie. In MW2, he was obviously their best player, right? You know, Pred is a really, really good player. Easily can be a top 3, top 5 SMG in the game when he's playing at his peak. So I wouldn't say he's overrated. Obviously, OpTic has been struggling ever since he came back. He hasn't really been all that good, and OpTic haven't really won any maps. So, like, it's funny looking back on Zent's comment here, but I disagree, right? Maybe fans be glazing, but I mean, listen, I glaze the LA Thieves guys, right? If you watch the watch party, every time Hydra gets a 2-piece, I'm glazing the hell out of them, right? So that's what you got to do if you're a fan of a team. My guy Parker here said that Cellium is the biggest key player for FaZe. And obviously people always talk about Cell baits his teammates and plays for kills and things like that. But Parker says he's the most important on the team. Now, determining importance on the team, right? It kind of just depends what you value, obviously. To me, first and foremost, I agree that Cellium is definitely a key player. And I do think he gets a lot of hate. I think he's adapted his play style a ton over the years. And even now where he's playing faster, he's trying to be a bit more unpredictable and not play as slow. I think things like that out of Cellium is definitely true. I don't think he's the most important player on FaZe. I think at times he can be. Like, I think at Major 1, he was their best player. But I think, unfortunately for AR players, the SMGs just are more important on average, right? Like, the guys who are going in first, they make the game a lot easier for their AR players. Now, obviously, great AR players are still great no matter who they have in front of them, right? Cell would still be great. Scrap would still be great. Dashy would probably still be great no matter who's in front of him, right? Like, those guys are still going to be great ARs. But to me, I mean, Simp or aBeZy's got to be just more important, especially aBeZy, because, I mean, he truly is the guy that gets baited, right? Obviously, he's getting tactically baited. Like, that's the point. He goes in, does damage, and Simp cleans up, or Drazah or Cell cleans up. But to me, that entry role is the hardest role in COD. It always has been, and it probably always will be. So I think aBeZy low-key is the most important player on FaZe, but maybe that's a hot take. And lastly, we're going to end one off from my guy, Ryan, at CDL Podcast. Shout out to them. If you don't listen to the CDL Podcast, look him up on YouTube. Another great Call of Duty content creator. But he said Simp is the most talented player we've ever seen. Obviously says accomplishments-wise, it's going to be hard to catch Crim, but in terms of talent and length of peak, there's very few players you can argue against him. And this one is obviously a hot take, because there's a guy like Scump in that conversation, who's of course the fan favorite, but is a take that I would not necessarily argue with. And so when you think about talent and length of peak, how many players can really be in the conversation with Simp, right? Simp has been a top player from BO4 till now, right? So for the last like 7 years, Simp has been a top player. Obviously, some years he was a little worse. Some years he was the MVP. So he's got a lot going for him. Other than really Scump, there's not a lot of other players you can say that for. Scump did it for longer, I'd say, which is part of the reason, right? Scump was like a top player for 10 years straight. He won across the most different games, things like that. But really between those two, I think it's just pick your poison. So I do offer the question out to you guys. Who do you think is the most talented player? Drop it in the comments. But if you think it's Simp or you think it's Scump, right now I would not argue with either. One day a guy like Scrap, a guy like Hydra could be in that conversation. A guy like aBeZy could even be thrown in there. He gets overshadowed at times by like Simp and his MVPs, but what aBeZy does, I think, is insane. A guy like Shotzzy could be in there one day. But generally, I think it's between Simp and Scump. So I flip a coin. I think either one's fair. But that's going to do it for the hot takes. Like I said, 125 likes on this video. I will do another one in the near future. So let me know if you want another one and drop a like. Sub to the channel for more CDL content. And hopefully, I'll see you all in the next video.